wind howled over the dry plains that night, dragging sand across the fences of Jebediah Cole's lonely ranch. The land stretched endlessly, painted gold by the fading sun and silver by the rising moon. Jeb, a quiet young rancher barely in his 20s, had always kept to himself. Folks in town called him the Virgin Rancher, partly out of mockery, partly out of curiosity. He wasn't the kind of man who drank, fought, or flirted. His world was made of cattle, fences, and the slow rhythm of the desert wind. That night, as the temperature dropped low enough to make his breath visible, he spotted something moving near the ridgeline, a figure stumbling through the cold. Jeb squinted through the dusk and saw a native woman, barefoot, trembling and clutching a thin shawl. Without hesitation, he grabbed his lantern, slung his worn-out jacket over his arm, and headed toward her. The closer he got, the more he saw the exhaustion on her face, dirt smeared across her cheeks, her lips pale, her steps unsteady. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence like a whisper across the wind. She flinched at first, uncertain whether to trust him, but when he draped his thick rancher's jacket around her shoulders, her eyes lifted, surprised by the warmth, not of the fabric, but of his kindness. "You'll freeze out here," Jeb muttered, motioning toward his cabin. She followed hesitantly, her gaze sharp, measuring every step. Inside, he stoked the fire, offered her water, and set a bowl of leftover stew on the table. The woman said little, but her eyes, dark and deep as midnight rivers, spoke of miles walked and dangers faced. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried weight. "You help me," she said in broken English, "but tomorrow, maybe you regret." Jeb chuckled lightly. "I ain't got much to regret." That night, she slept by the fire, wrapped in his jacket, while Jeb sat awake on the porch watching the stars. There was something in the air, a tension that wasn't quite fear, but a strange calm before a storm. Morning came bright and fierce, sunlight spilling across the plains like a promise. Jeb stepped outside, rubbing his eyes, then froze. At the far edge of his fence line stood rows upon rows of riders, warriors, mounted on strong horses, their faces painted, their spears glinting under the sun, at least 200 of them. The ground seemed to hum with the rhythm of hooves. His heart pounded, not from fear but from awe. The woman from last night stood among them now, tall and proud, his jacket still around her shoulders. One of the warriors, their leader, rode forward, older, broad-shouldered, with eyes sharp as flint. He stopped a few yards from Jeb, silence stretching like a drawn bowstring. Then, in a voice that echoed like thunder, he said, "You gave warmth to the daughter of our chief." Jeb blinked, realizing who she was. "She walked far, alone. You gave her life when cold wanted it," the man continued. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he raised his hand, and the entire line of warriors followed, pounding their chests once in unison, a sound that rolled like distant thunder. "You're under our protection now, rancher," the chief said. "Your kindness is seen." Jeb stood frozen, unsure if he was dreaming, the desert wind catching in his hair. He watched as the riders turned, their formation breaking like a wave, riding off toward the horizon. Only the chief's daughter lingered for a moment longer. Their eyes met, her gaze still calm, still unreadable. She gave a faint nod, then rode away, his jacket still wrapped around her. Jeb exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. The plains fell silent again, but nothing felt the same. His small act of mercy had echoed louder than any bullet or prayer. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jeb sat on the same porch where he'd met her, the memory of her eyes haunting and yet strangely comforting. He looked at the fire in the distance, the same fire that had once been his loneliness, and whispered to himself, "Kindness costs nothing, but sometimes it buys you everything." The night came soft and clear, stars spilling across the sky like witnesses to what had begun. Jeb didn't know it yet, but that moment had changed everything. For him, for her, and for the wildland that watched them both. And as the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice would say softly, "If you believe a small act can change a world, then hit that subscribe button, 'cause this story's just getting started. Days turned into weeks after that. Strange morning when 200 warriors lined up at Jebediah Cole's fence. The prairie had gone quiet again, but the air still carried the weight of that moment. Like the land itself remembered the sound of hooves, Jeb went back to fixing fences, tending his cattle, and working the soil. But something inside him had shifted. The loneliness that had once echoed through every plank of his cabin had softened. He would often look toward the horizon, wondering if he'd ever see the chief's daughter again. The woman who had come to him cold, silent, and half-frozen, then vanished with the sunrise wearing his old jacket. Her name, he later learned from a trader in town, was Naira, daughter of Chief Tewan, the leader of the Red River tribe. Folks in town had heard whispers about that morning too. Some said the Virgin Rancher had made a deal with the spirits. Others claimed he'd been spared only because of blind luck. But Jeb didn't care for talk. He knew what he'd seen, the gratitude in those warriors' eyes, the calm in Naira's face. Then one evening, as the sun bled orange across the plains, he saw a shadow moving near his fence again. It was her, Naira, alone, the same jacket still around her shoulders, dusted from travel. Jeb's heart kicked like a spooked horse. She approached slow, her horse breathing steam into the cooling air. "You are not safe," she said simply. Jeb frowned. "Not safe? Why's that?" She looked toward the western ridge, her eyes narrowing. "White riders come, soldiers. They think you help my people. They come for you." Her words hit like a hammer. Jeb had heard of the patrols, bounty men, land thieves wearing government badges. They'd been pushing tribes out, claiming the plains inch by inch. "Why warn me?" Jeb asked, his voice low. "Because you gave me warmth," she said softly. "My father says a heart that gives must be guarded." That night, Jeb packed what he could, but before he could leave, the sound of galloping broke the silence. Not one horse, but many. The horizon burned with torchlight. He could see them, riders, armed, coming fast. Naira grabbed his arm. "No time," she whistled sharply, and suddenly the dark came alive with movement, figures emerging from the ridgeline. Warriors, 24 at least, silent and steady. In moments, the land that had once been empty turned into a battlefield waiting for a spark. Jeb could feel fear crawl up his throat, but Naira looked at him with calm defiance. "You helped us once," she said, mounting her horse. "Now we help you." The first shots cracked through the air, flashes of fire against the night. Jeb ducked behind the fence, rifle in hand, his old Winchester, polished from years of habit, not use. The air filled with thunder, gunfire, hooves, war cries, the scream of metal against bone. It was chaos and rhythm all at once. Jeb fired once, twice, missing the first but clipping a rider's shoulder the second time. He'd never taken a life before, and even now, his hands shook. But Naira didn't flinch. She moved like wind and flame, her bow singing through the air. Her people fought not with hatred, but with the precision of survival. When dawn finally broke, the ground was scarred, the invaders gone, leaving silence behind them once more. Smoke rose from spent torches, the smell of gunpowder hanging like fog. Jeb stood among it all, breathing hard, his shirt torn, his knuckles raw. Naira dismounted and walked to him, her expression unreadable. "They'll come again," he said hoarsely. "Then we stand again," she replied. For a long time they said nothing. Only the wind spoke, carrying with it the first light of a new day. The Red River warriors began to fade back into the plains, silent as they'd come, but Naira lingered. She took off the jacket he'd given her and handed it back, the fabric now worn and stained with dust and smoke. "You keep it," Jeb said quietly. "Looks better on you." She smiled faintly, something rare and fleeting. "Then I'll bring it back when the snow falls," she said, and turned to ride away. He watched her go, the sun catching in her hair, the horizon swallowing her whole. The ranch stood quiet again, but no longer lonely. Jeb looked over the land, his fences, his fields, the sky so wide it made his chest ache. For the first time he didn't feel small. Beneath it, He felt like part of something larger, something alive. The story of a man who once gave his jacket to a stranger had become a legend, whispered across the prairie, growing taller with every retelling. And though Jeb never asked for glory, his kindness had carved his name into the wind itself. As the fire crackled that night, he lifted his gaze toward the stars and smiled. "Guess kindness don't just warm a body," he muttered softly. "It can light up the whole damn world." And as the screen fades, a warm voice echoes, "If this story lit a spark in your heart, partner, hit that subscribe button, because kindness is just the beginning."